Hey guys, tonight we journey to a land that burns by day and chills you with its ingenuity by night. Imagine standing barefoot on sun-baked earth, where the desert breathes heat like a dragon and the air smells of dry dust, cumin, and sweat. Now, imagine someone offering you a cup of ice-cold rose water in the middle of this blazing nothingness. That's exactly what we're going to explore tonight. You'll trudge through ancient Persia, where clever minds weren't just building empires, they were building ice houses. Not metaphorical ones. Literal structures that could store snow and ice right in the heart of the desert. Long before your fancy kitchen freezers started humming. Tonight, we'll follow the glacial trails of camels, peek inside a yakhchāl, and discover how science, mud, and stubbornness beat the sun at its own game. And one quick thing, you probably wouldn't survive a day here, unless you enjoy heat stroke and sand between your teeth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in from somewhere warm or chilly, comment your location and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far this sleepy little caravan stretches now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sand crunches beneath your sandals as you take your first steps into the Persian plateau. Dry, cracked earth stretches in every direction, broken only by ridges of ancient mountains. The year is somewhere between 500 BCE and 400 CE, depending on who you ask. And you're very much not in Kansas anymore. It's the kind of heat that makes you rethink every life decision, including wearing black. The air is so dry, your nostrils feel like they're lined with parchment. And yet, rumor has it, somewhere in this very land, people sip chilled drinks and preserve food with actual ice. You pass a small village, and a child waves at you with a sticky date in one hand. In the background, goats bleat and a pot simmers gently on a clay stove. It smells divinant. The wind shifts and you catch a whiff of something vaguely like camel. Life here is hot, slow, and remarkably inventive. You keep walking. Persia is vast at its peak under the Achaemenid Empire. It stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. But in its heartland, where temperatures routinely flirt with 40 degrees Celsius. That's 104 degrees Fahrenheit for the Fahrenheit faithful. Communities had to think creatively to survive. Enter ice now. The first thing to understand is this. Ancient Persians didn't make ice in the way we might in a freezer. They harnessed the extremes of their environment to trap cold. And one key source, mountains, towering, snow-capped, wonderfully inconvenient mountains, high in the Zagros range. Winter dumped its snow generously. These glaciers and peaks weren't just beautiful, they were the origin of one of the oldest cold chains in human history. Ice was harvested from up high and hauled down to where it was needed, not by trucks or carts, but by camel caravans moving at a pace that would infuriate your average Amazon Prime customer. Historians still debate whether this trade was purely seasonal or more year-round with smart storage tricks. Some argue it was a luxury limited to royal courts and temples. Others say even rural communities got their chilly fix from time to time. One particularly cheeky scholar even suggested Persian nobles may have used their ice access as a flex at parties. But, whether for royalty or ritual, the practice was real. The trick was moving it fast and storing it even faster. Let's talk about those camels. Imagine trekking down a steep icy slope with a grumpy belled beast beside you, each footstep uncertain. the ice threatening to melt before it even makes it to your hands. The journey could take days. Each block was wrapped tightly, usually in straw, sometimes in animal skins to minimize melting. They were loaded at dawn, when the air was coldest, and moved slowly through mountain passes. Along the way, you'd find rest stops, carved out, rock shelters, shady tree groves, and occasionally a well-placed cave. Anything to delay the inevitable meltdown. Ancient logistics weren't just about speed, they were about insulation, patience, and ritual. By the time these precious icy loads reached the lowlands, they were smaller, wetter, and worshipped like treasure. People didn't waste ice. It wasn't just for showing off. It was medicine, food preservation, religious offering, and hydration hack all rolled into one. Cold water could calm fevers. Frozen deserts sweetened summer ceremonies. And storing perishables, that was the real power move. But here's the rub. You couldn't keep hauling ice all the time. That's why, eventually, Persia gave birth to one of its coolest literally creations, the yakhchāl. But don't get ahead of yourself. We'll go there next. For now, you rest under a fig tree, watching as the caravan lumbers slowly toward a distant dome that shimmers in the heat haze. You don't know it yet, but you're about to walk inside one of humanity's earliest refrigerators, and it's made of mud. Asterisk, you reach the edge of the city, just as the shadows grow longer and the desert begins to lose its grip on the day's brutal heat. The wind softens, carrying the faint scent of baked earth, goatskin, and cumin. Ahead of you, rising like an ancient spaceship out of the sand, is a structure that looks like a beehive built by giants. This is the yakhchāl. Literally, ice pit in Persian. But don't be fooled by the simplicity of the name. What you're staring at is a masterpiece of engineering so clever. It might make your air conditioner weep from inadequacy. The domed shape is the first thing you notice. It stands some 20 meters high, built entirely from thick earthen materials that shimmer with heat by day, yet somehow stay cool inside. If you're expecting a grand entrance, think again. There's no ceremonial doorway, no ornamental arch. Just a low, narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a man and a mule to pass through, probably on purpose. To keep heat out, and thieves even more so. You crouch to enter. Inside. It's a different world. The air smells of damp stone and ancient, cold. Your feet hit the packed dirt floor, and you hear the faintest echo of water dripping in the distance. The temperature here, easily 20 degrees cooler than outside, and this isn't even peak performance. These structures were designed not just to store ice, but to defeat the desert's wrath with nothing more than geometry, mud, and good timing. It's a bit like walking into a fridge made by someone who had never seen a fridge, but deeply understood physics. Now, let's talk layers, because the yakhchāl is all about them. Beneath the dome lies a massive underground pit, often up to 5 meters deep. This is where the ice, snow, or frozen water was kept. The depth added insulation, while the earth itself acted like a natural coolant. But what kept the heat from creeping in? The walls of the yakhchāl weren't just any old bricks, slapped together. They were built from a special mix known as saruja, magical-sounding recipe made of sand, clay, egg whites, goat hair, lime, and ash. The result, a material so waterproof and insulating it could keep its cool even under the Persian sun. No mold, no leaks, no drama. Somehow it all worked without needing a single watt of electricity. The dome's shape encouraged hot air to rise and exit while the thick walls buffered against outside heat. Add to that some clever placement, usually in shaded areas, often with tall walls or trees nearby, and you had a passive system thousands of years ahead of its time. Historians still argue whether the yakhchāl was inspired by earlier designs from Mesopotamia or developed entirely independently. What's clear is that this wasn't just a fluke Persians built. These things across cities, villages, and trade routes, they knew what they were doing. As your eyes adjust to the dim interior, you notice the structure's other quirks: small ventilation shafts near the top, channels in the floor to drain meltwater, and sometimes even tiny chambers for food storage. In a few particularly fancy ones, there were layered storage spaces above, food below, like some kind of ancient cold storage suite. You run your fingers across the sarouj wall and feel the faint moisture it's preserved. Despite the heat, outside, this madandeg concoction has held its cool like a monk in meditation. In fact, if you pressed your ear to the wall, you could almost hear the sound of millennia passing silently by. But the real genius of the yakhchāl was just in its construction, it was in how it was used. Sea ice wasn't merely dumped inside and left to melt. Entire systems were designed around optimizing its longevity. Blocks were stacked in careful layers with straw padding in between, allowing air to circulate while minimizing contact. Meltwater drained into narrow gutters that funneled into nearby gardens or cisterns, making sure nothing went to waste. In many towns, the yakhchāl wasn't just a utility, it was a community hub. Ice distribution was managed by designated keepers, and strict rules governed when and how it could be accessed. If you were lucky or wealthy, you could have a portion delivered right to your doorstep, perhaps wrapped in cloth soaked with rosewater to keep it even cooler. The ancient Persian version of home delivery. Still, not everyone had equal access. Most commoners only used ice for medicinal or ceremonial purposes. Royals and wealthy merchants, they were out here chilling grapes and throwing snowball parties in the courtyard, while the rest of us suffered through sunstroke. One of the more fringe tales, though unconfirmed, is that some yakhchāl keepers developed secret recipes to slow ice melt using mineral salts and camel skin insulation. Whether it worked or was just clever marketing, who knows? But by now, you're starting to understand something vital. This wasn't just about luxury. In a land where heat ruled everything from crops to health, ice was power, and the yakhchāl was the throne it sat upon. You sit down on a cool stone slab inside the dome, grateful for the sudden reprieve. Outside, the sun continues to rage, but here, wrapped in silence and damp stone, you've found a little corner of resistance, a slow, stubborn triumph over nature. And just as you're getting cozy, a faint breeze brushes past your cheek from somewhere up above. Yes, the wind catchers are coming next. Asterisk, you tilt your head upward, following the path of that unexpected breeze. It flutters across your cheek, again cool, dry, and oddly directional, like nature's version of a whisper. You stand and start walking toward the far end of the yakhchāl, where a shaft leads upward through the thick dome. The breeze grows steadier as you approach. That, dear traveler, is no accident. You're feeling the breath of a badger, or wind catcher, masterpiece of ancient Persian climate control. Wind catchers are perhaps the most elegant insult to modern HVAC systems. They look like tall chimneys sticking out of buildings, often with slatted openings on all four sides, giving them a regal, louvered appearance. But unlike chimneys, they don't puff smoke. They inhale wind, guide it downward, and swirl it gently through a building like a polite house guest. The one built into this yakhchāl is subtle but effective. Hot air from inside the dome rises and escapes through it, while cooler air is drawn in through lower vents. This creates a circulation loop that maintains the internal temperature, often below freezing even in the middle of summer. You might be tempted to call it ancient air conditioning, and honestly, you wouldn't be wrong. Persians mastered passive cooling long before electricity made us lazy. They simply read the land and the wind the way modern engineers read blueprints. Now, imagine this. It's the height of a desert summer. Outside, the sand is hot enough to fry flatbread, but you're tucked inside a house with wind catchers positioned at just the right angles to pull in a northerly breeze. The air moves down tall shafts, brushes over a shallow pool of water, perhaps lined with clay or stone, and flows gently into the room. Cooled by evaporation and shaded masonry, you sit under the archway, sipping chilled pomegranate juice, and every now and then a new gust rolls through like a whisper from the gods. Not bad for 2,000 years ago, right? Historians still debate whether wind catchers originated in Persia or were influenced by earlier Mesopotamian ventilation towers. The first definitive references date back to around 400 BCE, but it's likely they were in use even earlier. What's indisputable is how far they spread. Variants of wind catchers appear in Egypt, the Arabian Peninsula, and even the Indus Valley, though Persia arguably turned them into an art form, and there was an art to it. Builders had to understand wind patterns, geography, and building orientation. Some wind catchers faced only one direction for optimal capture. Others had multiple shafts to catch breezes from several angles. And a few elite homes even had adjustable vanes. Yes, adjustable to fine-tune the airflow based on the time of day. One fringe theory suggests that certain religious scholars considered wind to be a sacred breath, divinely guided. Whether or not that's true, it certainly didn't stop anyone from using it to cool their basement wine cellar. In cities like Yazd, you'd find entire neighborhoods cooled by wind catchers. From the street, they rose like vertical sails on a stone, sea tall, angular, elegant. Even today, some of them still work, requiring nothing more than good design and a cooperative breeze. Modern architects have studied them, copied them, and occasionally failed to recreate them with the same finesse. Funny how sometimes going forward means going backward first. You run your hand along the interior shafts, smooth, cool stone worn from generations of wind and silence. Somewhere above, a bird flutters near the opening. You wonder if it too appreciates the occasional gust of refreshment. It wasn't just about buildings, either. Windcatcher principles were also used in underground aqueducts known as canots. These marvels of hydraulic engineering stretched for miles beneath the surface, carrying water from mountain springs to distant farms and cities. Along the way, air vents regulated pressure and, in some cases, created cooling currents that helped reduce evaporation. So yes, the same civilization that invented a freezer out of mud also piped cold air into their subterranean water highways. You're starting to feel a little less clever about your smart thermostat, aren't you? And just when you think they couldn't be more efficient, imagine combining wind catchers with a yakhchāl. Oh wait, they already did that. Some of the best preserved yakhchāls in Iran show clear evidence of integrated wind tunnels, perfectly angled to create circulation that prevents warm air from ever settling. It's a closed loop of cooling, ice below, wind above, physics in between. And all of this happened centuries before anyone even dreamed of freon or refrigeration coils. Ancient Persian engineers simply trusted the land, the air, and a little geometry, and maybe a lot of trial and error. As you stand at the base of this ancient shaft, breeze gently tousling your hair, it's easy to imagine a time when people didn't fight the heat so aggressively they danced with it, outwitted it, shaped it to their needs. Now you exit the dome slowly, blinking in the daylight. The air outside feels heavier now, denser somehow, after the refreshing hush of the yakhchāl. But there's more to learn, because sometimes the best way to beat the heat is to wait for nightfall. The sun dips lower, casting long golden shadows across the packed earth. You feel the day's heat loosening its grip, reluctantly, like a hand that doesn't want to let go. Villagers begin to emerge from their shaded homes, the streets slowly, waking for the second life that begins after dusk. You're not done either, because now comes the most unlikely trick of all. Freezing water, at night, In the desert, you rub your eyes, but no, you heard that right. Ancient Persians figured out how to make ice, not just store it, without electricity, refrigerants, or even hauling it down from mountaintops. All they needed was a shallow pool, a clear night sky, and a deep understanding of their environment. This is where science meets serenity and a touch of stubborn genius. Here's how it worked. Outside the city walls, usually beside or near, a yakhchāl workers would dig wide, shallow channels, no deeper than your ankle, but several meters long. These channels were lined with clay or stone, filled with clean water in the evening, and then left exposed overnight. No lids, no coverings, just water, stars, and a whole lot of hope. Then nature did the rest. During clear desert nights, with no clouds to insulate the earth, heat radiates upward into the atmosphere, what scientists today call radiative cooling. The air itself may remain a few degrees above freezing, but the surface of water, especially in these shallow, motionless pools, can dip below zero. Enough so that, by dawn, a fragile crust of ice would form on top. It wasn't thick, it wasn't even that strong, but it was ice, and that's more than enough to start building a block over several nights, every morning. Before the sun rose too high, workers would come and harvest the thin sheets of ice, stacking them carefully in the nearby yakhchāl. They used straw mats, cloth, and even sawdust to insulate and separate the layers, like making a pastry. A frozen, incredibly time-consuming pastry, and yet it worked. Historians still argue whether this method was widespread or limited to specific climates. Some believe it was primarily used in central Iran, where the altitude helped night temperatures drop low enough. Others suggest that while the process was slow, it was reliable enough to serve whole communities if practiced nightly through the colder months. Either way, it's a masterpiece of low-tech innovation. While modern people flip a switch and curse their power bill, ancient Persians looked to the stars and said, "Let's freeze something." Of course, there were variables. Too much cloud cover, no ice, sudden wind, might stir the water and ruin. The freeze, sandstorm. Well, now you've got gritty slush. Not ideal. That's why these operations were usually led by someone experienced, part scientist, part farmer, part gambler. There's even one quirky account in Verified, but charming, that these ice makers developed superstitions around it. Workers reportedly whispered to the water as they poured it, asked the sky's permission, or left small offerings at the edge of the pools. Did it help? Who knows? But hey, when your business model depends on night breezes, it's probably wise to stay on the moon's good side. You squat down beside one of these ancient channels now, still visible in the cracked earth. It's dry, today's summer has stolen its breath, but you imagine what it must have looked like by moonlight. A sheet of still water, reflecting stars like a mirror, slowly giving way to ice under a desert sky. You run your fingers across the edges. Even in daylight, the clay holds a trace of coolness. This method wasn't just about utility, was about rhythm. It turned ice making into a seasonal ritual. Every winter, night after night, thin ice would be collected, stored, layered. By spring, the yakhchāl would be full ready to chill, preserve, and provide. You wonder what it must have been like to be the first person to try this. Did they stumble upon it accidentally? Did some curious farmer leave a bucket out one night and find a miracle in the morning? Or did someone, somewhere, do the math, watch the stars, and think, we can use this? There's no definitive answer, which is perfect, because it leaves room for wonder. The desert doesn't give up its secrets easily, but if you listen carefully past the sand, past the hit, you begin to hear them. In the soft crunch of footfalls by the water trench, in the rustle of straw as ice is packed away, in the quiet applause of the stars as humans defy the impossible, one fragile sheet of ice at a time. You sit back, breathing in the cool, dry night. Somewhere a jackal calls, tomorrow the sun will rage again. But for now, the Persians have outwitted it. Morning returns with a vengeance. The desert sun rises like it has a grudge, and within an hour, it's already boiling the horizon into a blur. But inside the yakhchāl, and deep in shaded courtyards across the city, people are sipping cool drinks, brushing damp towels across their necks, and believe it or not, enjoying chilled deserts. Welcome to Persian cooling culture. It's not just about survival, it's about style. You're walking through a bustling Persian town, perhaps somewhere in ancient Yazd or Shiraz. You pass open-air markets, spice sellers hawking saffron and dried mint, tailors measuring cloth in shaded booths. There's a smell of fresh flatbread in the air. But what catches your eye are the servers fanning themselves in a shaded pavilion, carrying clay goblets filled with, you guessed it, high-schooled beverages, and not just any drinks. One is rosewater infused with crushed basil seeds, icy to the touch. Another is mulberry syrup diluted with snow and served with a scoop of fermented yogurt. The Persians weren't just storing ice, they were living with it. Flavored, chilled, scented, and elevated. This wasn't survival. This was an art. Royal courts led the charge. Inscriptions and fragments of court poetry hint at opulent feasts, where drinks were served in metal cups wrapped in cloth, soaked with cold water. Dishes arrived, garnished with slivers of frozen fruit. There are even tales, though, we'll take them with a pinch of salt, of nobles bathing their feet in chilled wine during summer readings. Historians still debate whether the average Persian citizen had access to this level of luxury. Some argue that while yakhchāls existed in smaller towns, their contents were mostly reserved for officials, religious figures, or special events. Others suggest that enterprising merchants developed an early form of commercial ice distributions, selling thin slivers of ice to regular folks who used it medicinally or, on rare days, to turn a drink into something divine. But here's a curious detail. It wasn't all about food and drink. Cooling rituals seeped into every part of life. In the hammams, the public bathhouses, attendants would occasionally offer Patrons, small cloths soaked in cold water to refresh their faces. Wealthier homes placed ceramic jugs of water near wind catchers, so they stayed cool for guests. And during the hottest days, it wasn't uncommon to nap in a sardib or underground cellar, while sipping sherbet diluted with SNOW melt. Particular fringe tidbit stands out. Certain Persian texts suggest the use of early evaporative cooling beds, wooden frames over which damp cloths were draped, with air from a nearby wind catcher funneled across them. It's basically a swamp cooler, thousands of years early, and with better interior design. And let's not forget the fashion. While modern folks beat the heat with shorts and tank tops, ancient Persians leaned into light, breathable robes made from linen or fine cotton. These were often soaked in cold water, wrung out, and worn fresh, creating a makeshift cooling vest. Sounds weird, maybe, but you'd be surprised how refreshing damp sleeves feel when your eyebrows are sweating. Even headwear played a role. Turbans weren't just ceremonial, they insulated the head, trapped sweat, and in some cases were lined with thin ice pouches for those who could afford it. Yes, you read that right. Ice in hats. We don't recommend trying it with your beanie. Meanwhile, palace kitchens had their own chilling secrets. Special stone chambers carved beneath the floor stayed naturally cold and were used to preserve dairy, herbs, and on occasion meats. Combined with yakhchāl stored ice, this allowed for food preparation that would make modern foodies drool. And on feast days, the peace day resistance, early sorbets, called faloodeh in its later incarnations, these desserts began with crushed ice or snow, mixed with syrup, often rosewater or grape, and occasionally a few threads of saffron or bits of date. They were sweet, tart, and freezing cold. Imagine enjoying that under a fig tree while a gentle breeze passes through your robe. Now we're talking. Of course, ice had its limits. There were no freezers, no deep storage. Everything was small batch, short-term, and sacred. That's what made it so precious. So when you were offered a chilled treat, you weren't just having dessert, you were sharing in a victory over the elements. And if you were lucky enough to live in a home with its own yakhchāl, your social standing just skyrocketed. People noticed visitors would comment on how refreshingly cool your dates were. Children would whisper about the day they got to taste snow in the city. And merchants offering chilled drinks on a festival day could double their prices and still sell out before noon. You duck into the shade now, imagining yourself as a vendor, setting out cold clay jugs at your stall, the outside beaded with condensation. It's the little things like a breeze from a wind catcher or a spoonful of iced nectar that made all the difference, that turned unbearable heat into something livable, something even enjoyable, not bad for a civilization surrounded by sand. You wake before dawn, the desert still hushed in pale silver. The air hasn't yet remembered how to burn. Today, you're not here to sip chilled rosewater or admire domes, you're heading to the back end of the operation. Welcome to the world of yakhchāl, logistics and labor, the unglamorous grunting engine behind all this desert refrigeration magic. Let's be honest, maintaining a literal ice pit in a sun-blasted climate wasn't exactly a part-time gig. Behind every chilled drink and frozen dessert was a small army of sweaty, underpaid, probably quite sunburnt workers. Ice didn't transport or stack itself, and sarouj, that miracle mud mix, used to build the dome. Someone had to haul the clay, beat the lime, crack eggs by the hundreds, and stir it all by hand. No cement mixers here, friend. just buckets, donkeys, and biceps. This morning, you're tagging along with one of the keepers of the ice, the yakhchāl, chi. If we want to be poetic, he's up early, robes tucked up around his knees, already shouting orders at a group of young men carrying baskets of straw insulation. It's time to check the ice stores, drain any excess meltwater, and repack weak layers. You follow him down into the dome. Inside it smells faintly of wet stone and the ghost of cold. There's an art to stacking ice, and these workers know it like bakers know dough. Blocks must be placed with air gaps in mind, aligned to ensure even melting. Too tight, and the stack becomes a heat trap. Too loose, and airflow accelerates. The thaw, it's a frosty game of Tetris with real consequences. And when the meltwater trickles down into the drainage system, someone has to manage that too. The floor slants, ever so slightly, deliberately funneling water into clay pipes that lead to underground cisterns or irrigation channels. This isn't waste. It's repurposed for nearby gardens, grapevines, or cooling baths. Historians still argue whether ice maintenance was a formal profession or part of seasonal civic duty. Some texts suggest cities had rotating rosters of laborers assigned to the yakhchāl, like a municipal responsibility. Others point to caste or class-based divisions, that this was the work of lower-status citizens, perhaps even indentured labor. Either way, nobody here is wearing silk or quoting poetry. There's a hierarchy. At the top is the ice master, someone with years of experience, sharp intuition, and likely a very tired expression. He knows when to harvest, how to layer, how to interpret temperature shifts in the air. He listens to wind. He watches stars. He can tap the wall of the yakhchāl and tell you how long the bottom layer will hold below him. A dozen men with carts, cloths, ladders, and the patience of saints. Some have special duties, wrapping ice in straw mats for transport, sealing vents during heat waves, repairing cracked sarouge with terrifying precision. One quirky story passed through oral tradition claims that a yakhchāl once slept inside the dome for an entire summer, just to feel the ice breathe. Was it spiritual devotion, a heatwave survival tactic, or did he just get kicked out of his house? We'll never know, but locals swore the dome stayed cooler that year. Laborers also managed the delivery routes. Ice had to be rationed and scheduled. You couldn't just show up with a clay pot and expect a scoop. Records suggest that tokens or clay slips were used to track distribution, little early versions of punch cards, maybe. Royal households got priority. Merchants with coin came next. The rest had to wait for festival days or emergencies, on scorching. Summer mornings, donkeys loaded with straw-wrapped ice would leave the yakhchāl in single file. Couriers ran ahead to warn kitchens to prepare, or bathhouses to warm towels in advance. A typical delivery route might span several miles, with strict orders to stop only in the shade and avoid steep climbs. Every minute in the sun chipped away at their precious cargo. And when it melted too fast, well, that's when things got tense. There are quiet records buried in footnotes and folk tales of fights breaking out over bad deliveries, bribes paid for earlier access, and even a reported case of a noble accusing a delivery boy of theft after his block arrived small. It wasn't just a luxury economy, it was a Cold War economy. Still, the labor had its rewards. Workers were often compensated with leftover ice shards, which they could use at home or trade at local markets. During festivals, the yakhchāl crew walked with pride, often the coolest people in town, literally and figuratively, and it wasn't all drudgery. There was a rhythm to it, a camaraderie. These men knew the dome's quirks better than anyone. They could tell if something was off just by how the wind moved inside. They whispered jokes as they passed buckets, sang as they hauled ropes, and developed a quiet, daily intimacy with the ice itself. As you sit beside them now, sipping lukewarm barley tea and wiping your brow, you realize something. This wasn't just a job. It was a relationship with the dome, with the elements, with time. They didn't fight the heat. They danced around it, maintained their ritual, kept it balanced. And when one block cracked too early, when a leak sprung in the wrong place, they didn't panic. They just nodded, shrugged, and fixed it. Because in the desert, the cool must be earned. Asterisk, the sun now hangs high and heavy, and the world begins to shimmer. You slip into the shade of a wide archway, wiping your forehead and pausing to breathe. Just beyond, under a pergola strung with vines, a servant arrives with a silver tray. On it, a cup glistens with condensation. The scent of rosewater and crushed mint drifts through the air. You've earned this. A drink, chilled with ancient snow, in the middle of the desert. And now, it's time to indulge your curiosity and your sweet tooth as you explore the surprisingly rich and ice-powered culinary culture of ancient Persia. Because what's the point of all this ice if you don't use it to make something delicious? Let's talk about sherbet, not quite ice cream, not quite juice, but something deeply Persian. Known as sharbat, these cooling drinks came in dozens of variations. Some used sour cherry syrup, others pomegranate, quince, or even cucumber, mixed with snow or shaved ice from the yakhchāl and sweetened with honey or grape molasses. The result was refreshingly cold, lightly tangy, and just sweet enough to trick your brain into thinking the heat outside didn't matter. One particularly indulgent version included a syrup made from violets, yes, violets blended with snow and served in tall ceramic goblets. Historians still argue whether this was a common treat or a royal extravagance. But let's be honest, if you had violet-flavored snow in 400 BCE, you probably had a very nice patio, too. But sharbat wasn't the only cold creation. There was faloodeh, perhaps the earliest form of what we'd now call sorbet or semifredo. Picture this: rice noodles soaked in rose syrup, mixed with snow, and topped with a squeeze of lime. It was chewy, icy, and strangely addictive. Faloodeh is still popular today in modern Iran, but its ancient roots are what make it remarkable. Some scholars believe the Achaemenids, the same dynasty that built sprawling palaces and tried to out-administer the known world, had versions of faloodeh served at banquets to dignitaries from across the empire. Imagine a diplomat from Lydia or Babylon sitting in the Persian heat, suddenly handed a bowl of frozen noodles. It probably made quite the impression. Of course, food preservation was just as important as food presentation. Chilling wasn't only for pleasure, it was about practicality. Fresh dairy, keep it near the yakhchāl. Delicate herbs, store them in damp cloths in cooled chambers. Pickled fruits and vegetables were sometimes kept at lower temps to slow fermentation. And meat, well, only in short bursts. Freezing it was rare, but chilling it for a few hours before preparation gave cooks just enough time to work their magic. One curious recipe fragment from a Sasanian-era tablet mentioned something akin to yogurt mixed with saffron and snow, served as a palate cleanser between meat courses. Whether this was a forerunner of modern mastica, yogurt with herbs and cucumber, or something stranger altogether is unclear, but it shows just how deeply cold things were woven into their culinary mindset. And then there were cooling rituals. During religious events, During Zoroastrian festivals like chilled rosewater was used not only for drinking but for sprinkling on the hands of guests as a sign of blessing and renewal. Ice itself was symbolic, representing purity, clarity, and balance. In some ceremonies, bowls of snow or cold water were placed near sacred fires to represent the duality of creation, heat and cold, fire and water, light and dark. This wasn't just chemistry, it was cosmology. Even on a purely daily level, cold things were integrated thoughtfully. Wealthier homes had ice closet nooks in shaded corners, where clay pots filled with perishable goods were placed on stone slabs cooled by stored ice. These rudimentary fridges weren't just functional, they were often beautifully tiled, shaded with hanging cloths, and sometimes had tiny drain channels for meltwater. Fringe historians, the kind with long beards and more opinions. Then citations suggest that there may have even been ice competitions during some festivals where rival chefs or households displayed their most elaborate chilled confections, rose-shaped ices, spiral fruits frozen into blocks and snow-packed into molds of mythical beasts. No direct evidence survives, but the idea is tantalizing. The Great Persian Ice. You wander into a small kitchen now, where an elderly woman grinds saffron in a stone bowl. She hums softly, stirring her pot of syrup. A young boy enters, holding a small wrapped bundle inside, a few slivers of ice from the day's ration. She nods approvingly, uncovers a clay bowl of thin noodles, and sets to work. A few minutes later, you're handed a tiny dish, homemade, faloodeh, cold, sweet, floury. It melts in your mouth and numbs your tongue just slightly. Outside, the sun still rages. But inside, in this corner of ice and syrup, the desert doesn't win today. That's the real lesson here. The Persians didn't conquer heat by hiding from it, or overpowering it, they outfought it. They turned ice into something more than utility. It became luxury, medicine, symbolism, and art. And this was only possible because of an entire ecosystem that began high in the mountains, passed through caravans, wind catchers, domes, and hands, roughened by work. So the next time you open your fridge without thinking, pause for a moment. Your ancestors were freezing noodles in the desert. With science and rose petals, evening stretches its long arms over the land. The shadows grow softer now, the colors more forgiving. You're sitting by a low wall, a clay cup in your hands, the last of the faloodeh melting quietly around you. The city begins its twilight shuffle, shops packing up, donkeys clopping home, children still chasing shadows like they're racing the dusk. But tonight, your curiosity pulls you a little farther into the ancient supply chains that made all of this cold luxury possible. Because here's the not-so-chill reality. Ice doesn't just appear in the middle of the desert. When winter wasn't cold enough to create nightly ice sheets, or when spring festivals demanded more than the yakhchāl had stored, ice had to be hauled in. Sometimes from distant mountain peaks. Yes, really. Picture this, high in the Alborz or Zagros Mountains, teams of laborers and mules carve blocks of ice from snowfields and glacier edges. It's before dawn. The world is still blue and frozen. They cut carefully square blocks, sometimes wrapped in straw or canvas, and begin the slow descent. This isn't a sprint, it's an ice pilgrimage. Caravans would travel for days, sometimes weeks, to bring this precious cargo down to the valleys. The routes were chosen carefully, not just the shortest, but the shadiest, often winding through narrow ravines and forests, even digging temporary snow pits to rest the ice during midday breaks. Historians still argue whether this was a government-run operation or managed by private merchant guilds. Some records point to state-sponsored ice delivery for royal cities, while others mention independent tradesmen, known by names that loosely translate to icemen or mountain coolers. One 10th-century poem even romanticizes the profession. They bring the clouds down in sacks, trail frost through the summer fields. A drink chilled by their path is a gift from the gods. Sounds poetic till you remember these guys were hauling literal tons of melting stone down cliffs with no more insulation than a camel blanket and a prayer. And yet, they made it work. Upon arrival in town, the ice was immediately divided. Some went to the yakhchāl for long-term storage. Some was delivered to temples or palaces. The rest, depending on the time of year, was sold at market, often in tiny, carefully weighed bundles. This was not a product you bought in bulk. It was a treat, like perfume or silk. You can almost see it now, a hot market square. A vendor calling out his offerings, one pinch of snow, cold as the moon. As children press coins into their parents' hands and noble women raise parasols to shade their prize. The merchants themselves, they made a decent living. Transporting ice wasn't just hard, it was high risk. If the load melted too fast, profits vanished. If the mountain route flooded, it was a total loss. But if all went well, the margins were excellent. Some merchants, it's whispered, even salted the outer blocks knot to preserve the ice, but to make it seem colder to the touch. A kind of ancient psychological upsell. One fringe account more legend than confirmed truth tells of a caravan that brought a full glacier chunk down from Mount Damavand during a royal wedding in midsummer. The block was placed in the center of the banquet hall, surrounded by flower petals and silver bowls of sherbet, slowly melting while dancers circled it. A visual and olfactory spectacle. If true, it might be the world's first interactive centerpiece. And then there's the issue of security. Yes, people tried to steal ice. Some merchants hired guards, especially on longer routes or during shortages. Others traveled in larger groups, relying on numbers. One particularly dramatic scroll recounts a case of ice piracy on a caravan trail where rival traders ambushed a shipment, only to abandon half the blocks because they melted too fast to carry away. Not exactly Ocean's 11, but still. Pretty thrilling, of course. The reliance on mountainous ice had its downsides. Bad weather could delay deliveries. Political instability could block key roads. Avalanches. Game over. That's why cities tried to build yakhchāls big enough to reduce dependence on outside shipments. But for major festivals, long summers, or poor freezing years, the mountain-to-market system remained essential. You step onto the old caravan trail now, the dust soft under your sandals, the stars just beginning to blink on overhead. It's quiet, save for the breeze and your own breath, but you imagine it: bustling mules clinking, men shouting instructions, carts creaking under the weight of frozen treasure. And here's the beautiful irony. This cold chain existed thousands of years before the invention of refrigerated trucks, insulated coolers, or ice machines. All they had was wool, straw, timing, and an unrelenting sense of purpose. Ice, to them, wasn't just refreshment. It was a symbol of wealth, of sophistication, of control over something wild and fleeting, and every sliver of it carried a journey. So, the next time you open your freezer for a few cubes, try to picture a camel somewhere in 500 BCE, trudging down a rocky slope, carrying snow to a party that hasn't even started yet. That's the kind of chill worth remembering. The stars are in full bloom above now, scattered across the night sky like spilled sugar. A soft hush has settled over the desert, interrupted only by the occasional dog bark or the creak of a distant gate. You walk slowly along a moonlit path, your thoughts lingering on blocks of ice and baskets of snow. But tonight, your mind turns toward architecture, because it wasn't just the yakhchāl that kept Persia cool. The entire city was designed to defy the heat. Let's step into the ingenious, heat-defying urban planning of ancient Persia. You begin in the heart of a typical Persian city, perhaps ancient Yazd or Ray, or even smaller towns that no longer appear. On modern maps, the first thing you notice: shade everywhere. Alleyways are narrow, buildings are tall, and the streets seem to coil in deliberate, serpentine curves. This isn't bad planning. It's strategy. These winding alleys, called couches, are designed to keep sunlight from flooding the city floor, by staggering the height of the surrounding buildings and tilting the alleyways. Architects created corridors where sunlight touched only a fraction of the street even at high noon. The result: cooler air, lower radiant heat, and less sweating per step. Genius. You duck into a kucha now. The air immediately shifts. Cooler, quieter. Even a faint whisper of wind lingers longer. Here, funneled and softened by centuries of clever design. You're not just in a street, you're in a thermal labyrinth. And look up, see those small, arched bridges between buildings. Those are sabot-covered walkways that connect homes and businesses across narrow alleys. Their job: twofold: provide more shade and act as structural bracers during earthquakes. Oh, and they trap cool night air in the early morning so it lingers into the afternoon. Historians still argue whether the sabot was primarily an engineering feature or a social one. Were they just shady sky bridges, or did they allow discreet movement between homes, especially for women observing hijab laws? Either way, the cooling effect was undeniable, but the innovation doesn't stop there. Let's walk toward a courtyard house, a standard feature of Persian residential design for over 2,000 years. From the outside, it looks like a fortress. High walls, few windows, minimal decoration. But step inside, and it's a different world. You pass through a modest entry, often a zigzag corridor, to prevent direct wind and prying eyesand into the hoshti or vestibule. Then, suddenly, it opens up into a lush central courtyard, a garden, a fountain, and 4 symmetrical wings surrounding it. Welcome to paradise. Literally. The Persian term for this layout is chahar bog, meaning for gardens. It's the origin of the English word paradise, and it wasn't just spiritual, it was practical. The garden created microclimates, the fountain added humidity, and the orientation of the wings allowed residents to follow the shade throughout the day. Imagine it: breakfast on the east side in morning light, siesta in the north wing during peak heat, evening tea on the west veranda as the sun dips low. Every meal, every rest, every gathering cooler, calmer, calculated. And let's not forget the cellar level, called the sardeb. You descend now, feeling the temperature drop with each step. Down here, clay jars of water stay fresh. Food is stored, and families retreat when the upper floors are too warm. Add a small wind catcher shaft, and you have what is essentially a 5th century air-conditioned basement. One fringe theory even suggests that some homes had ceramic water jugs embedded in the walls, positioned behind lattice screens. When the breeze passed over them, it created a localized cooling effect, a kind of ancient air diffuser. Whether this was widespread or experimental is up for debate, but if you've ever hugged a cold clay jug on a hot day, you know how comforting it feels. And it wasn't just homes. Mosques, markets, and public bathhouses all incorporated similar cooling logic. Domed roofs with open oculi allowed hot air to rise and escape. Thick adobe walls absorbed daytime heat and released it at night. Public squares were placed near fountains or canals. Even water clocks were stored in shaded niches. To prevent premature evaporation, cities became organisms, breathing with the seasons. By now, you're walking past a public hammam. The warm steam rising from its rooftop vents smells faintly of eucalyptus. Inside, men lounge in the semi-darkness, cooled towels over their eyes, laughing softly between the hush of baths and the splash of buckets. Even these wet, heated spaces had cold rooms, quiet chambers with stone benches and snow-cooled basins for those moments when the heat got too bold. It's in these places, amid the quiet genius of geometry and stone, that you truly understand the Persian approach to design. They didn't just build for beauty or strength, they built for balance. Their homes weren't just shelters, they were instruments, played carefully, tuned to the winds, harmonized with the sky. A Persian architect, if asked how to beat the heat, wouldn't build a bigger fan. He'd change the shape of your roof. And here's the kicker: many of these strategies remain relevant today. In fact, some modern sustainable architecture is now borrowing heavily from Persian principles: passive ventilation, thermal mass, courtyard cooling, and shaded corridors. Which begs the question, were they ahead of their time? Or did we simply forget how to listen to the land? You pause in the courtyard now, the scent of jasmine in the air, your back against a cool stone wall. Somewhere nearby, a windcatcher sighs. You close your eyes, feeling the city breathe with you. This is more than architecture. It's philosophy made of mud and shade.